What's going on, YouTube? Back at it again with another awesome Pokemon video. My name's Jacob with Prominence Games, and today we're doing a tier list of the Brilliant Stars standard format. This is an incredible set. Pre-releases are about to start this weekend, the 12th. Today's the 11th. The day before I'm going to a pre-release myself. The set will be out on the 25th, I believe, and it's going to be legal for the first regional championships back, which is the Salt Lake City regionals. I'm not personally attending this event. However, I am going to Indianapolis, which will be using the same format, and then I'm going to New Jersey as well, which there's a chance it's going to be this format. It may be the next one. We have to wait a little bit longer to see. But with cups and everything coming back up, and this being the real in-person format people are playing, I think there's kind of some interest to go over what decks we think are going to be the best. So I'm going to get right into it here. There's a lot of unplayable decks on this list, so I'm just going to throw those into the don't play this as we go, and then I'll explain my thoughts on every deck that we come across. So a few of the ones that nobody should play right off the top, just going to throw these in here now. I have no idea why they're on here. I couldn't even tell you what most of these are, honestly. Let's see, they're a bunch of theme decks. That one, this one, right? I don't know what that is. And this. So everything else looks kind of real, so we'll just start going in. I have played most of these. I've been playing a lot of doing a lot of practice myself. I was planning to go to Orlando before it got canceled, so I probably have about 50 hours of pretty relevant testing into this format already. So I hope, whatever games I have practiced, I kind of have some insight for, and that can help out a little bit. I think we're gonna need one more tier as well. So let me just change this for you guys. All right. So I believe the best decks in format here, Mew VMAX, I believe remains at the top. This deck inherently just only gets better. You get Ultra Ball, you get the Choice Helmet, or the Choice Belt, whatever it is, the plus 30 damage. And those two just add a super consistency boost to a deck that was already like the most consistent in the format. I would be a little weary when considering playing this deck, even though it is the best, it's at the very top of the tier list. This is the deck to beat, and there's a lot of new dark decks in format. Arceus is an incredible card and it allows lots of miscellaneous combinations of cards to sort of work. And I think the go-to target for Arceus is going to be just those miscellaneous dark types like Galarian Moltres V, Hoopa V, the baby Galarian Moltres, and the baby Hoopa as well. All of those are incredible against Mew, and I think people who aren't practicing as much in this format or just looking to point to a deck, pick it, and try to go for the best result possible, that's going to be what they're going for. And their only purpose is really to take down Mew. So this is the most consistent deck, and I think just generally it stays at the top. But like I said, just be a little bit careful because that is the deck to beat. Let's see. Next, we have Raichu. I think this deck is pretty close to the top. It's an incredible engine. You can kind of play this with or without Arceus V-Star. The Arceus V-Star is the way that I personally prefer to play it. It just is really good. It's a 2-prizer, a lot of HP, good for picking out what cards you want from your deck, accelerating energies. It kind of just does a little bit of everything. However, you can also choose to play this with more baby attackers like the Bolton V to accelerate your energies and just kind of have a attack that's a little bit broader than the straight 180 accelerate some energies. You don't have to play DCE, and those are just a few of the perks of not playing the Arceus, I suppose. Either way, you should be playing Flaffy in the deck. That's an incredible card to accelerate your energies as well from the discard once things get knocked out. And Raichu itself is just an incredible attacker as well, having basically Alcremie VMAX's attack on a 2-prizer that's a basic and has just a lot of built-in energy acceleration. I think this is a super solid play, and it takes out a lot of the big 3-prizers in the format. There's another unplayable deck right here. I'm assuming this is talking about Ice Rider, the Inteleon Arceus. I don't see Ice Rider anywhere. Oh, never mind. I guess Ice Rider's here. Then I don't know what this is. We'll come back to it. We'll start with Ice Rider then. So this is going to be the Ice Rider with Arceus as well. This is an incredible deck as well. I think this is one of the safest picks. Nothing is incredible against this deck, I suppose. Metal is definitely a relevant weakness. There's some decks we'll get in here in a second that hit this deck for weakness and kind of do a really good job. But having the combination of 2 prizers, 3 prizers, and then your Inteleon engine as well is just a super solid lineup. After you use your 1 Arceus V-Star ability, you kind of get the lock abilities for the rest of the game with your Path to the Peaks, because you don't have any more V abilities that you need to use from that point forward. Having the Choice Belt really helps Ice Rider, do well in this format. The extra damage boost is super relevant, and I think that's something that this card desperately needed to, get to the top of the tier list this way. It has super good coverage. Like I said, water type is a pretty decent weakness to be hitting, I suppose. It's not the most relevant, but fire does get some tools this set that make it work. So water is not as bad of a weakness as it was last format. And like I said, Path of the Peak's incredible. The consistency engine between Drizzile, Inteleon, and Arceus in the same deck is unmatched, and I think this is the deck that can utilize those tools the best of all the decks on this list. So I would recommend playing this if you were looking for a safe pick going into any of your upcoming events. Here's another theme deck. Let's see what's next. Durant. I thought this deck was kind of funny. It's not very good. I'm gonna put this in tier 4. It's slightly above don't play this. It could probably win a couple of games, but I don't think it has enough quite yet. It's missing just a little bit, maybe like a handiwork or something, like one more card that could help it get that additional mill, because it seems to get pretty close. And in the games I've played with it and played against, it's pretty good at getting your opponent down to like the between 5 and 10 card range. Just being able to mill 4 every turn, plus your cursed shovels that you should be having attached, let you mill 6 sometimes whenever you get knocked out. We have Roseanne's research or Roseanne's backup, whatever it's called, and then the double turbo energy, which is a very good way to loop your energies. I guess Durant does work better now than it could have before just because you have those extra energies, but it's definitely not something I recommend playing. Next, we have Control. Prior to making this list, the last couple of weeks, I would have put this up here. I thought it was a really strong play, but unfortunately, the more and more I started to play games with it, the more and more I realized that Arceus kind of just screws this card over. Any deck that plays Arceus can kind of just stick one in the active and accelerate a bunch of energies to itself. And without something like Articuno GX in format or Luke Metal, there's no way to deal with that, regardless if you're playing Path to the Peaks and just other disruption. Hammers aren't enough, even if you can get them back. Floatzel is a really cool card. And with Roseanne's backup, Team Yell's Cheer, I believe is what that card's called. There's room for this deck to get better, but I think right now it's just missing a couple more key components. The way I have liked playing it though, running your Dusknoir and your Orbeetle are really cool. Just 2 of the stage 2 lines, a couple rare candies, Cinccino engine. Overall, it's pretty solid. The deck does work, unlike it Control's kind of been dead for a while prior to right now. So it's cool to see this deck be able to function a little bit, but unfortunately the matchups are just not there, and I would not recommend playing this deck to a large event. Jolteon. This is somewhere between tier 2 and tier 3. We do have Manaphy in format now, which is bench barrier, which really hits hard on this deck. I would say this is easily a tier 1 of the Fusion Strike format, but having that in format as well, I'd probably put it in tier 2. It definitely does still work. You have your Inteleon engine, which is as strong as ever. Zigzagoons are incredible. And just being able to do 100 to the bench for 1 lightning energy is never going to be a bad attack for sure. Personally, I haven't played too many games with this deck just because I'm not a huge fan of it. But if you were going to play it and you really wanted to find a way to make it work, something that might be worth trying is playing the Baby Jolteon, the one that has the ability where if it has a memory capsule attached, you get to turn off water type abilities. And if you do manage to set that up, you do turn off bench barrier on your opponent's side of the field, and then you can kind of have free reign on them. But this deck does, you want to have your Sobbles down. There's a chance you want your own Manaphy down. Luminion's in format, so there's a chance you'll have that in play. You want another Jolteon, so bench space might be a little bit of a problem. And I don't know if you want to dedicate, like 3 to 5 spots in your deck and a bench space to setting that up, but it's worth considering. Next up, let's see here. Inteleon VMAX. I think that this card specifically is up here in that 1.5 tier. I've been playing a lot of games with this. I play it with like the 1/1 Urshifu VMAX, the Rapid Strike. Um, Instead of playing like the standard Rapid Strike Galarian Moltres build that hits Mew for weakness, I think that one kind of gets shut down a little too easily by Manaphy. But playing this in combination with the Rapid Strike Urshifu really gives it a chance to thrive because there's lots of different outs to hitting your opponent on the bench. You have your, quick shooting Inteleons, the double gunner Inteleon VMAX, and your standard Urshifu attacks. So regardless of what they decide to do to protect their bench, they're not really safe from anything. Choice Belt really changes this card. So being able to hit 170 instead of 140 changes a lot, and you're one-shotting basically everything. 340 is like the perfect number to be hitting, and it one-shots every big relevant card in the game. And then Cheryl's still super incredible as well. Lightning weakness does kind of hurt, with Raichu being super good. Before, all we had to deal with was Jolteon, and that was kind of just one matchup you could hope to dodge or just take the loss to in a big tournament. But I do expect Raichu to be popular and across the top tables at your event, so look out for that. But if you have the Urshifu in your deck, you know, the fighting type, it covers that weakness. And I think this is a super solid play. It's one of the things I'm considering myself going forward. I was considering playing to Orlando during my testing, and I would keep playing this deck. Next we have Charizard V-Star. I think this is better than Jolteon for sure. I'm going to move Jolteon down a tier. There's a lot of tier 2 decks that I think are better than that. Charizard V-Star is a really good card. It does a lot of damage for not too many energies. You have your Magma Basin to accelerate to it. You have some cool new attackers like the Entei V, the Moltres. I'm not a huge fan of Kindler, but if you want to play that, I suppose you can just for an extra search. And Arceus is like the go-to partner for this card. I do think this is a pretty overrated deck, however. First of all, I know this isn't really important to the competitive viability of this deck, but this is going to be the most expensive deck by far in this entire format, because you have to get Charizards and you have to get Arceuses, and for the underwhelming power of something that you would think would be so good, it kind of just is lacking. It's sort of like Single Strike is what it reminds me of before it got Umbreon. Kind of just, you attach some energies, you do a lot of damage, and that's about it. That's all Charizard is. That's all Charizard has ever been. You can play the Charizard VMAX, I guess, which also just does a lot of damage for a lot of energies, but it has a very consistent engine. It's easy to accelerate your energies. You have the baby attacker like I spoke of. Entei provides extra draw. You can play the Ninetales V as well to copy your opponent's attacks, which gives it some versatility. So I wouldn't necessarily say don't play this deck or it's bad or anything, but it just doesn't have the it's lacking what some of the decks in 1.5 or above, have going for it. Next up, let's see. I don't know what this is, so it's a theme deck. This is probably pretty bad. I'm putting all the decks that I don't think anybody should really be considering over in this tier. All right, the Ross Cawthon deck, the Galarian Moltres Hoopa deck. This is probably a tier 2 deck. It does the same thing that does in this format, where it's kind of just there to beat Mew. I've never been a fan of this deck. I don't think it's very incredible. It serves its purpose for sure, but besides that, things just have a lot of HP. I've never been a fan of Hoopa as an attacker. I don't think it's all that great, especially because it can't hit weakness on anything. That would make it a lot better if it could. The Galarian Moltres, however, is a really good card, and I think this is any deck that plays Dark Energy should be playing this if you're playing more than like 3. Just being able to hit your opponent for taking prizes and doing that much damage on a 1 prizer is really nice, but overall, it kind of is just underwhelming, like I said again, especially with Mew is probably not going to be as big in numbers as it is in this current format, and I think that's what this deck mainly has going for it, is just having a lot of Mew matchups and taking it down. It's a pretty secure like 6-2-1 kind of deck in this current format, but with Brilliant Stars coming out, the deck doesn't really lose anything, but there's not as much Mew to go around, and I think the other decks in the format are kind of just going to have an easier time dealing with this. Rapid Strike Malamar. I think this is another solid tier 2 deck. It's a good 1 prizer. Anytime you can play a 1 prizer and do a lot of damage and take out a 2 or 3 prizer, that's a big thumbs up from me. Doing 40 for each Rapid Strike card in your hand is a super solid attack, and then you have the Octillery to set up, you have your Shinshinos, or you can play Inteleon, either one is fine. I personally prefer playing like the Zoroark Cinccino engine. I like that a little bit better, but I totally understand if you prefer to play the Inteleon with the quick shooting as well, just for a little extra damage. Uh, but it's a pretty standard one prize deck. It doesn't do anything too fancy. It has the same game plan in a lot of matchups. Getting Manaphy does help this deck. It struggled a lot against Jolteon last format, so I do think it gets buffed a little bit. But besides that, not too much changes in this deck. I don't even think you really play Ultra Ball in this kind of deck because you don't want to be discarding the cards in your hand. So you get your Manaphy, you maybe get Lumineon, you get Choice Belt, which is kind of just a plus for every deck in this format. And it's a pretty solid pick, and I would probably put it at the top of tier 2 right here. Next, Eternatus VMAX. So I'm gonna put this somewhere between tier 2 and tier 3. This deck does get Ultra Ball, which is a huge help for something like this. You have the option to play Liepard, which is just Cinccino but a dark type. So you have Trade, which is a super awesome option and kind of reminiscent of my boy Zoroark GX, just doing damage for the amount of Pokemon on your bench and having Trade. But it's kind of clunky. There's a lot of things that you would like to be playing in this deck, I think, that just don't necessarily fit in the deck. I think I'm probably going to put it here in tier 2, though, because hitting Dark Weakness is something that's always incredible. Fighting Weakness kind of sucks, but it's not as relevant of a weakness to be having this set just because of how many other good decks there are. And yeah, like I said, I think it does what the Hoopa Moltres does, but better. And it kind of has a chance to one-shot a lot of the other big cards in the format, especially with getting Choice Belt combined with your Zigzagoons and whatnot. So if somebody played Eternatus, I wouldn't be surprised, and I would expect to see this. There is Collapse Tower, however, or Collapse Stadium, whatever it's called, and that limits both players to 4 bench. So you, as an Eternatus player, you do kind of have to be playing a lot of stadiums, because I think Collapse Stadium is probably going to be the go-to, like, if you have a 60th spot in your deck and you don't know what to put in, you're going to throw a Collapse Stadium in there, maybe a Path to the Peak. Both those stadiums really hurt this deck, so just be prepared, play a lot of stadiums if you're going to be playing this. Galarian is probably the move with the Hiding Dark energies, and it's a pretty solid pick. Next, we have Gengar VMAX with probably Barrel as your draw option. I think this is a tier 3 deck. It's pretty similar to Charizard. You do a lot of damage for some energies. Barrel's pretty cool, has Abyssal Hand. You have your Houndoom and Single Strike energies, which are always good. It doesn't have the greatest weakness in fighting in the world, and it's not as consistent, I found, as Eternatus, and I would definitely just rather be playing Eternatus than this. Doing 60 for each V your opponent has in play is a really nice attack, though, and for 2 energies, that's even better. But I keep finding myself just comparing it to Eternatus, and having the most straightforward game plan in like the entire format with this deck, it's not something I'm a super big fan of, especially being on a 3 prizer. But I suppose it gets the job done. Like I said before, it hits Mew, and that's just, we've already named 3 decks in the last like 4 that hit Mew for weakness, and I think that's going to be the trend of this entire format. The better they do against Mew, the higher they are up on this tier list. Let's see, Greedent VMAX. That'll be next. Shout out to my boy Davey. This plays Suicune in it, but I suppose that's kind of, I actually don't play Suicune in my Greedent VMAX list. This is more of a theme deck. I'm gonna put this down here in tier 4. It's kind of funny. I play Arceus in it. It's kind of just the go-to option. And anything that does play Arceus is just gonna inherently be better than anything on the don't play this tier, because Arceus is like the greatest card ever. On the off chance you can pull off a Greedent VMAX play, if it's going to work, now is the best it's ever going to be. You can accelerate to it with Arceus, which is incredible, and being able to use Arceus's ability to search out like your Toy Catcher, your Spongy Gloves or whatnot, definitely adds a cool consistency boost to the deck. And similar to Ice Rider, I suppose, you get to run that, you know, whatever it's called, Drizzle's ability combined with Arceus, which is a really cool engine. But this is just a very underwhelming attack. 30 damage. It's probably going to be doing 10, assuming you have a double turbo, which is even worse. I didn't think that card could get any worse. And then you have to knock out a basic Pokemon as well. And with Sobble being a little less involved in this format than it has been before because of the amount of other cool draw Pokemon there are, I just don't see this deck doing anything. But I suppose it works, which is more than I can say for some of the decks on this don't play this tier. So if you want to give it a go, kudos, but I would not recommend it myself. Here's another weird deck that I don't want to rank. I could put some of these in there as well. Don't take my word all the way for some of these don't play this tiers. I'm only kind of ranking the decks that I've played with myself, which is a lot of them, and the ones that I think are worth playing. But so anybody could always come up with some random list that happens to do well with any of the ones down here. So if you want to be creative, give them a try. Definitely recommend it, I suppose, but that's not something that I'm going to be doing myself. All right, next we have Mad Party. Oh, sorry about that. Where did I put Mad Party? Yeah, Mad Party. So Mad Party is pretty cool. It's a deck that's kind of fallen in and out of standard during its time being legal. It's really good and expanded, but I think being able to have double turbo energy come back is kind of something this deck gets a big boost from, and getting Ultra Ball specifically is what allows this deck to thrive. And I feel pretty comfortable putting this in tier 2, honestly. It's another great one prizer. Psychic Weakness is a really nice weakness to hit. You have the options to attack with basics or stage 1s, which is really nice. A built-in draw engine is always cool. And then just getting the consistency boosts of Ultra Ball, Lumineon, whatnot is really nice as well. What else? Choice Belt, obviously, super helpful for this deck. Being able to do that extra 30 damage on Vs and whatnot is super cool. And I think this is a cool card. There is always the option for people to be playing Spiritomb, depending on how big this deck gets. And if that does end up in things, it definitely gets knocked down a tier, because there's not much this deck can do about that. It has very low HP Pokemon, and they're just going to get knocked out by Spiritomb and kind of lose. While we're on the topic of this deck, however, I want to bring up Wormadam, which is personally my favorite deck by far in this entire format. And I want to put this up in 1.5 at the very top of it. I think this deck is everything Mad Party is, but better. You have super awesome weakness coverage in Metal, Fighting, and Grass, which basically hits everything except for the Psychic weak Pokemon in format for Knockout. Oh, and the Dark Pokemon, I guess. And then you have the option to play Stage 1 Zoroark, the one that switches itself with the Stage 1 from your discard, which is super amazing. So you basically have unlimited attackers. Chinchino's an incredible draw engine and a way to ditch Pokemon. Ultra Ball, Choice Belt, they're super helpful for it. You have Path to the Peak, which is pretty cool. And then you can kind of play a plethora of cool Stage 1 attackers in your deck because you're probably playing that 4/4 Zoroark, and that opens up limitless doors of opportunities for you to try new things and find out cool techs that work. Having Bench Barrier really allows this deck to thrive as well, because I think if we didn't have that, it would struggle a lot against things like Jolteon and Rapid Strike. And I think this is a deck to look out for. And the only reason I put it a tier above Mad Party is because with Spiritomb, I think if that card does end up in decks, it's not as detrimental to this because of the ability to use other Stage 1 Pokemon. You're not necessarily limited to the same game plan every single game like you are with Mad Party. And you have 110 HP on each of your Wormadams, so even if they do use Spiritomb, they're going to shuffle all your Pokemon, and that's really going to suck. But they're probably not going to be knocking out more than like 1, maybe 2 Pokemon, which is a way to keep yourself in the game. So definitely look up for this deck. This is an incredible deck, and this is what I would be playing myself if there was the regionals tomorrow. Let's see, what's next? Zacian and Zamazenta. I think this is, I'm gonna put this in tier 3, honestly. It could be tier 2, but it kind of, we just have to see how the format progresses a little bit more. I think this is just the most outdated deck there is. It does the same exact thing that it's been doing for the last like 2 years. It doesn't have ADP or anything, and it's kind of just a very boring deck that doesn't do too much. Back in the day, 220 and 230 on 2 prizers, especially with the Cape of Toughness, gives it 270, 280 is pretty nice. But now we have these V stars in format that have the same amount of HP. Naturally, they give up 2 prizes as well, and they kind of just do a lot more than these. Especially with V stars being in format now, that's another thing that hits through Zamazenta's ability, so you don't have that immunity to as many decks as you used to. But I guess Metal does hit weakness on things like Ice Rider, which is pretty nice. It's not the worst thing. And I think having a fire weakness really isn't that bad. Like I said, Charizard is kind of overrated, and realistically, you kind of also have to account for accessibility for some of these cards. And a lot of people honestly just aren't going to be playing things like Charizard because of how much they're going to cost and stuff. So I wouldn't be too concerned with that. But 230 isn't that incredible, honestly, for 3 energies, and you have to have the switch each turn. Zamazenta's attack to get rid of special energies is nice though, and that's still a pretty good attack in my opinion. But at the end of the day, you're limited. You have your Raihan, your 4 metal saucers, and that's about it. And besides Ultra Ball, this deck really doesn't get anything. It's one of the few decks that I don't even think plays Choice Band or Choice Belt, because it already had the Rusted Sword, and the deck never played that anyway. So if you play this, I mean, this is probably the easiest deck in the format to play. Most people have these cards because they've been around for so long. Um, so I wouldn't say it's a terrible play, but honestly, figure a different deck out, please. Next up, we have Sableye Weezing. I think this deck is pretty good. I like it more than this. Honestly, I think I like it more than Eternatus as well. Weezing is an incredible card. Just having ability lock is something that's always been super strong and will always be super strong. And Sableye is a really good 2-prize dark type Pokemon that hits easy knockouts on 3 prizers, has an incredible, you're hitting a dark type weakness, which is like the best weakness to be hitting for. And you knock out Mew, ability lock your opponent. It's easy to snipe. I guess you have Zigzagoon and Teleon, whatever you want to play. And it's a pretty just standard deck with some cool options, and you kind of aren't limited to the same gameplay in each game, which is something that I really enjoy decks having, just being versatile. Now, Shadow Rider Whimsicott. Unfortunately, I think this deck is pretty far up on this tier list. A Whimsicott V-Star is an incredible option that this deck gets that it didn't have before. Being able to have some lock potential is something that's really cool, and the deck honestly needed it in order to stay in the game. Locking special energy specifically is something that is pretty underrated in this format, I think. Locking special energies literally just makes a lot of decks lose on the spot. Like if you're playing against Wormadam, Mad Party, I'm sure there's more things on here than just those two. You can kind of just immediately win because you have the combination of Baby Shadow Rider's first attack, just locking those as well, and then Whimsicott doing the same thing, but for 160 is super cool. And then being able to just take a big 3-prize knockout on your opponent's bench without even using a boss is super incredible with Whimsicott's V-Star attack. And then Shadow Rider is just an awesome Pokemon as well, having that built-in energy acceleration and draw power. Having a lot of HP and doing a lot of damage for its regular attack is something that's never going to be bad. The only thing keeping this deck towards the lower end of tier 1.5 is that weakness to dark. The same thing that's, like I told you before, everybody's playing decks to beat Mew. That's like the big thing that Mew is. It's just the deck to beat. And unfortunately, Whimsicott, Shadow Rider kind of falls directly in the line of fire of that weakness train. So there's going to be a lot of dark decks, and you're probably just going to lose to those. But it's going to be a matchup thing, and if you can just dodge some of those matchups or get lucky in some of them, you have a really good matchup spread against the rest of the format, and I would recommend playing this deck. Let's see. Next up, we have Rapid Strike Moltres. This deck is probably a little bit lower than the Inteleon VMAX version. I'm probably going to put it tier 2 towards the top. Rapid Strike is just a great attacker, being able to do 120, 120, but like I said earlier, it does get shut down by the mana fee. The Moltres is pretty nice, being able to have, like I said again, that dark weakness coverage is something that is just super important in this format, and it's kind of built-in energy acceleration as well, being able to, Dire Flame Wings and then energy switch to keep your attacks every turn, but it's more of a linear strategy and gets shut down by that mana fee that a lot of decks are going to be playing, so it's kind of going to get gatekept a little bit by that. And it gets hit. Well, I guess it doesn't really get hit for weakness by Mew because you have the Moltres in there, but it's a pretty good deck, and I definitely think that it's worth considering. But just look out for the mana fee, and if you really want, I guess you could consider playing that Baby Jolteon I was talking about earlier. However, I think this is probably the most bench space limited deck in the entire format. There's just too many things you want on your bench. You want your Octillery, your Inteleons, your Rapid Strike, and your Moltres, and I don't really see that happening. But a pretty solid pick overall. Next, we have, let's see, Shadow Rider with Alcremie. I'm probably going to put this down in tier 3, honestly. There's no reason we should be playing this instead of the Whimsicott version, just being able to help a lot of your bad matchups get better. This one is just a very linear version of the same deck. I guess it has higher damage output, which is cool, I suppose, but with the VMAX is starting to almost fade out of the format just a little bit, and we're moving into that V-Star format of 2 prizers. I don't really think it's worth having a deck that only uses 3 prizes in your format is just gonna give you a negative prize trade on the rest of the format. And it's just one of those standard big damage for big energy decks, and I'm not a super huge fan. Suicune Ludicolo. I'm gonna also put this in tier 3. Suicune is an incredible card. Ludicolo is a pretty cool card as well. This dominated the Evolving Skies format and did pretty solid during the Fusion Strike format. But honestly, I think it kind of just gets the Zacian treatment for the rest of this format. It's just a little outdated. It can't really keep up too much, and having to go and set up an entire Ludicolo is just a little annoying. It might be worth trying to play Arceus, maybe, just to guarantee that rare candy and search for your Ludicolo with it. But at the same time, you already have your Inteleons, and bench space could be a problem. I know you want a full bench, but it just depends on what you want your setup to look like, and how many cards you want to dedicate to playing an Arceus line. But like I said again, this deck does work. It can take knockouts on basically anything, and it's definitely not a bad deck, but it's not something that I would immediately look to for what deck to play to my next major event. Dragapult. Dragapult, it has that dark weakness, but it does have cool spread that does get around Manaphy, which is kind of nice. I'm probably going to throw this in tier 3 as well. Of the spread decks in the format, I think the rest are still better than this. 130 snipe, 5 damage counters is a okay attack. But for 2 energies and not a super great way to accelerate to it, it's pretty underwhelming pretty underwhelming as well. Has dark weakness, and it can't really do anything about that. I wouldn't play this deck myself to anything, but it probably functions pretty alright, and it's a deck. Duraludon VMAX. I'm putting this up in 1.5. I've been sleeping on this deck. I originally had it down in tier like 3 on my own tier list just before I started playing with any of these decks. I think this is the sleeper pick for the whole event. If I was going to Salt Lake City right now, I would be playing either Wormadam or Duraludon because this ability is amazing. There's so many special energies in the format, and forcing your opponent to play Path of the Peak in basically any deck in order to hit you is just such a crazy good ability. And being able to just take, one shots on Vs and then 2-shotting everything else for 3 energies is pretty okay. But getting Arceus is such a huge buff for this deck. And instead of just having to manually attack for 3 turns and hope your ability gets you by, you are actively powering up and doing damage to your opponent, and it really puts them on a timer to find their Path to the Peaks if they're even playing it. And then they still have to get through basically a 280 HP Lily's Pokédoll just to go through 2 more full Duraludon VMAXs that are probably powered up because of your Arceus, and you get to find whatever cards you want. This is an incredible deck. I'm going to put this all the way up here, and I would be terrified of playing against this if you're playing basically any other decks on this format, and it has no weakness. Duraludon is insane. What do we have next? I think this tier list is it's missing what I think is the other tier 1 deck. I'm gonna pretend this Inteleon here is a just basically any other Pokemon, because I think Arceus box style decks are going to be up at the very top as well. Personally, I think the Dark package is pretty cool that I was talking about earlier. Being able to play things like the Galarian Moltres V or Hoopa V, Arceus itself, and then lots of miscellaneous other attackers. There's so many options for just an Arceus box deck to work in this format. You can play Aurora Energies if you want. You can play Suicunes, Entei. There's just endless opportunities for this deck to work. You have the new Zamazenta V, which is pretty cool, having just perfect weakness coverage on the rest of the format. And I don't really think this deck loses to anything else because of the amount of options you have. As this picture says, I guess you could play Inteleon, but I honestly don't think the deck even needs it. Just that Arceus box package is something that will be at the top. I think people are going to find out the perfect line of Pokemon to be playing in it. And once people figure out the best way to play this deck, I think it's going to surpass Mew and become the new best deck in format. We just have to wait a little bit longer to see how that deck develops. But definitely be on the lookout and come up with some ideas, honestly. This is such a fresh format. The set's not even out yet. And if you want to push your creativity, that is the deck I would start with. This is another theme deck down here. Ray VMAX. I'm going to put this in tier 3 or 4. I'm honestly going to throw this in 3. I think I would have put this in tier 4 a little bit earlier, but I've been looking at some Japanese results, and the deck is kind of working. Ray VMAX itself is actually a very good card, but it's never had the the cards around it to be very good or the format to really thrive in. Having Flaffy is really cool. Having Arceus is even cooler. You have a built-in draw engine, built-in energy acceleration, and built-in search. So it's a super consistent deck. I think it's funny. You have the option to play the Pikachu V Union, which is kind of cool, although I wouldn't really recommend it. Being a 3-prizer is all right. 2 retreats pretty cool, but the no weakness is also really nice. You hit for a lot of damage, and you have Manaphy for bench barrier, which is pretty cool and helps you against a lot of your old bad matchups. But honestly, I just think there's better decks that kind of do the same thing, like the Charizard V-Star I was talking about earlier, like Shadow Rider. Um, Actually, I lied. I'm gonna put this up at tier 2. I do think this deck has gotten better. Probably on the lower end of tier 2. It's a Rapid Strike card, which is pretty cool. I don't think you'd be playing Rapid Strike Energies because you should be playing Arceus if you really want this deck to work. But there is a couple of cool options, and with the ability to run miscellaneous lightning attackers, I always, like I keep saying, I like decks that don't have to play a super linear strategy, and this is one of those decks that can kind of do lots of different things depending on how you make your list. And it's a deck to look out for. Next up, we have Dhelmise. Shaymin V-Star is bad. If you're gonna play Dhelmise, don't play it with Shaymin. Just play with Arceus, like you should be doing with like all the other decks. It's still not that great. Dhelmise is a pretty unique card, being able to kind of have a small version of Whimsicott V-Star's V-Star attack. With the amount of energies you have on it, doing damage to one of your opponent's bench Pokemon is kind of cool. But the damage output is kind of lacking. It's a 3-prizer and it's kind of just slow. And besides Arceus, there's like 0 good way to accelerate your energies to it. So I wouldn't recommend playing this deck. And if you do, just don't play it with Shaymin V-Star. That's not a good card at all. Let's see. Blissey could work, I guess, but I'm probably gonna put this in tier 4. It's a basic. It has a lot of HP, and Sharon's Care is kind of cool. I think this picture is implying more of a wall version of this deck, and if it is, I think that's even worse. There's not much I can really say about this besides the usual. You should probably just be playing Arceus in it and accelerating energies that way. The double turbo is kind of cool, but remember you have that -20, which is pretty relevant. I don't play Blissey, not very good. Corviknight Bronzong, I haven't actually played anything with this, so I can't give it a very thorough ranking. If you were going to play some sort of wall stally deck control, I think the Floatzel deck is the way to go. But generally, I don't think this is a format quite yet for that sort of thing to thrive. I guess I'll put it in the bottom of tier 3, but I wouldn't recommend it. And if I were to recommend it, like I said before, just play the Floatzel deck. That deck can at least win against things that aren't playing Arceus, which is pretty few and far between, but you'll find some good matchups across the board. Victini VMAX. If you're going to play Fire, play Charizard, but this is a pretty cool card. Having Kabu is pretty sweet, I guess. There is a lot of the problematic matchups up at the top here. Having the Inteleon VMAX that can hit you for weakness, Ice Rider hitting you for weakness. Arceus box can play basically any water Pokemon at once, and a lot of the really big loss of energies, big damage attackers are going to be a lot more relevant than they were last format, and that kind of scares me a little bit for Victini, because just sticking a Pokemon that has a pretty relevant weakness up by itself is not something that I'm a huge fan of, but it's a pretty good card. Hits for really good damage. Having Choice Belt helps it out a lot. But it isn't something I would necessarily recommend playing. Next, we have Entei V. If you're going to play Entei, I actually do think this is better than Suicune at the moment, so I'm going to throw it at the bottom of tier 2 here. Having Magma Basin is a really cool option this deck has, and it has a little bit more HP. It does have higher retreat, which is kind of unfortunate, but it has that built-in draw engine. Hitting fire is just a pretty good weakness, I suppose, to hit on things. It has that Victini problem where it's weak to water, but as a 2-prizer, it's not that big of a deal. And having the options to play other supporters besides Melanie is pretty cool. You can still play the Ludicolo if you want, I think, but just being able to accelerate your energy with Magma Basin instead of a supporter does give this a little bit of an edge over Suicune, and I think if I were going to play one of these decks, this is probably the move. However, Raikou is probably the best up in this lightning box. That's another one of those attackers you get to play, which is pretty cool. Single Strike. Um, I still think this deck deserves a spot in 1.5. However, I found it to be a little underwhelming. It's one of the decks that changes the absolute least going into this new format. I guess you get Choice Belt like every other deck gets. You get Ultra Ball. But besides that, I guess you get your Bench Barrier as well. It does the same thing it used to do. Fighting in Dark is a really solid weakness spread to have. And being weak to Grass is kind of cool. Psychic's not that great, but you have a really good coverage. Like I said, you do a lot of damage. Houndoom's still a great energy accelerant, but I just think there's some better options towards the top to be playing that have less linear game plans. Decidueye, I'm gonna put this in tier 4. This is not a good card. You are stage 2, which is kind of slow. You do a very small amount of damage. Safeguard is the only thing keeping this relevant at all. And with the amount of one prize decks that are in the format now that weren't present before, this does not have a place in the metagame, but because of Safeguard and Safeguard alone, it keeps it slightly above the don't play this tier, but don't play this either. Togekiss Walls, I presume. I guess this will go above Corviknight. It's a even bulkier Pokemon than Blissey. You have Charons. You can search out for any cards, which is kind of cool, especially with the double turbo energy. So I just don't know what you would be searching out exactly. Even if you are playing like a control build with hammers and stuff, you don't really have a way to get those back once you're done using them. And you're kind of just waiting for your opponent to naturally run out of things, and any competent player that you're playing against that just doesn't burn all of their resources for no reason is going to beat you. But being able to just Acerola, a 310 HP Pokemon, is pretty cool. And I'm pretty sure it's weak to Lightning as well, which you're kind of just gonna lose automatically against this. But for the most part, Lightning isn't super relevant anymore. So it could work, but not something I would look too deeply into. Vikavolt Inteleon, I'm going to put down here. If you're going to play Vikavolt, just play Lightning Box. It has lots more options. Item Lock is a really good thing to do, but only being able to do that with not much more is pretty lacking. And I don't think you're not doing enough damage even with Inteleons to really keep up with anything, and I would not recommend playing that. Hoopa Genesect. This deck was pretty niche during the format that it's in right now, the Fusion Strike one, and I think it kind of does the same thing that it did before. I'm going to be a little generous and put it in tier 2, but I think this is just an infinitely worse version of the tier 1 deck that should already be doing the same thing. It's a little outdated as well. It's just using Genesect instead of Arceus as your draw engine, and because you're not running Arceus, you're kind of limited on the amount of different Pokemon you can use. Hitting Dark and Psychic is the perfect weakness coverage to be hitting, and Hoopa is a great card for hitting good weaknesses, but you're kind of just limited on what you can do exactly. Genesect is a great card for drawing, but you want to have other Pokemon on your bench that aren't Fusion Strike Pokemon, and you're kind of limited as to what you can draw. So while this deck does work, and it can probably beat some of the decks a little above it, if you want to play a more fine-tuned version of this, just play that Arceus Dark box that I was talking about a little earlier. Sylveon VMAX. I've never been a fan of this deck, honestly, but it probably still works. I'm going to put this up towards a little above Jolteon. Rapid Strike energy, really good energy. Sort of like the Arceus box, you have the option to play lots of cool attackers, and you kind of do have the door open to play other attackers that you couldn't play in the Arceus deck because of the Rapid Strike energies. Being able to play, your Blaziken, I guess. You have your Rapid Strike Urshifu. If you really want, I guess you could play the Inteleon VMAX, and then the Sylveon itself. You have pretty good weaknesses. You can still play the Galarian Moltres E-Switch for your acceleration, and you have the tool that keeps you as a 2-prizer. So this deck probably still works. I've just never really been a fan of it, and I think there's other things you could be playing, but I wouldn't be opposed to somebody proving me wrong and going ahead and making a good list for this. Centiskorch VMAX. Don't play this. Don't play this deck. It probably still works a little bit though. You have, like I keep saying, Arceus, Magma Basin, Choice Belt, lots of damage, lots of energies, but this is one of the other just most linear decks. You pile a whole bunch of energies on one Pokemon, hope it doesn't die. I guess you have like the heat energies or whatever they're called that make you take 20 less, but then you're playing those and the double turbos and basic fires, which means you're not really having that many basic fires in your deck, so you can't accelerate that much, or you do have a lot of basic fires in your deck and you're not playing other good consistency cards. So while this deck can hit a lot of damage, I guess it's a 3-prizer, and just play Charizard if you want to play a fire Pokemon that's better, or even Victini, I guess. Leonzard. This is a 1-prizer. I have not seen anybody do anything with this or really talk about this, but is another solid 1-prizer. I'm going to put it in tier 3. I could be wrong. It could honestly surprise me and be a lot farther up on this list, or it could just be like some of the other random 1-prizers and that don't play this tier and make its way down there. But I have a little bit of faith in this one. Having the Choice Belt and the Magma Basin, like all the other fire decks, really give this a boost. And it can really take knockouts on the big cards, like the big VMAXs, Mew, and whatnot, which a lot of these other decks can't do. And doing that on a 1-prizer is something that is super impressive. So that deck still needs some development, but I would love to see that work. This Inteleon VMAX we're not going to talk about. The Tool Drop deck. This is probably tier 4. Don't play this either. It's kind of cool. Honchkrow can have like 4 tools attached to it. It's pretty funny. I think with 4 Cape of Toughness, Honchkrow officially breaks the highest amount of HP that could be had realistically in like competitive Pokemon standard. But this deck has already kind of been a thing, far in the past with the Trubbish and the Sigilyph, and it was never really great then. I don't think it's really going to change now, but it's sort of funny. It kind of works. The Suicune Entei deck. I'm going to throw this here in tier 2. I believe that this picture should also have Arceus in it. It's just not because it's, already 2 cards. And this is kind of just another version of this deck I have in tier 2, but it's focusing more on these 2 Pokemon rather than that dark package I was talking about earlier. And honestly, I think one or both of these cards could still find their way in this deck, and it's very similar to the one I have up at the top, but just based on what's presented here, I could be wrong on that, and these 2 cards aren't as they're just not as great of a meta call as that dark package is, but the deck definitely still works. I have a friend who's been playing something very similar to this, and it's been working against a lot of the decks at the top here, and it has a solid play, and it's just another way to play that cool Arceus box. Rapid Strike Melanie. I'm going to throw this here in tier 3. However, I'm pretty sure the Inteleon VMAX deck and this are pretty similar. Just this is by far the most limiting version of the deck, I think, in my opinion. You don't have the cool double gunner ability to have that additional spread. You have to dedicate your supporter every turn to do what the Moltres can already do. And if you whiff that supporter, then you kind of just, lose. And if you're playing Melanie, you're probably not playing like fighting energies or anything. And I don't know, I'm just not a fan of this deck. But I suppose it works. Rapid Strike is just an inherently good card, and it's going to work regardless of what you play around it, but I think this is the weakest way to be playing it. And then these are all kind of irrelevant as well. Lastly, Leafeon VMAX. I'm going to be honest, I've looked the littlest into this card since it's come out. I've like never played it. I've never really been a huge fan of it. I could be wrong here. I'm going to throw it in tier 3. Leafeon V-Star is a pretty cool addition to it, I guess. Grass weakness is actually a pretty decent weakness to be hitting, and being weak to fire isn't all that bad. But it's so reliant on you just having like all of your tools in play constantly, and the moment you lose any of them, like your stadium or anything, you just fall so far behind, and it doesn't impress me too much. So yeah, that is all I have on this tier list. I'm going to be making some deck profile videos. I have a lot of these built in real life with proxies and stuff that I've been practicing with, and the ones that impress me the most, or I think are the most underrated, I'll be going through and giving you full 60 card lists with suggestions on different ways to play it. But for right now, I think this is a pretty accurate representation of what I believe be the tier list for before the set officially comes out and we get to see a little bit more of it. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, leave a like, subscribe. Go check us out on Twitch at Prominence Games over there. We're going to be streaming some tabletop testing for this format going into some of these events that we have coming up. And yeah, so I'll see you all later.